So the news has been broken that Anthony Joshua will have his first title defence as a voluntary defence of his IBF title on June the 25th against American Dominic Breazeale. On the undercard as a co-main event will be George Groves versus Martin Murray. Let's start with Anthony Joshua versus Breazeale. I can see why they've made this fight. Dominic Breazeale is unbeaten. He's 17-0 with 15 knockouts. So he could be sold as having a very, very high knockout ratio. We'll come to that later because I actually question his power. Breazeale is American, which is clearly going to be good for those guys who are looking to build Joshua's image and reputation over in the States with a US broadcaster. Breazeale is an Olympian. Breazeale is 6'8", I believe, so may actually have a size advantage over Anthony Joshua. Although I'll be interested to see what that looks like when the two men come head to head. But I acknowledge there are reasons why Dominic Breazeale would be a good opponent, for Joshua. Also, he was in the top 15 of the IBF, which, as we discussed in a previous video, there were only about 5 people available from the top 15 for a voluntary defence. So I do acknowledge the options were somewhat limited. But in my mind, Dominic Breazeale is not a good fight. And I think I actually said in my videos when I was discussing Eddie Hearn's shortlist of American opponents, Bermain Stavern would be my first choice, Eric Molina would be my middle choice, Dominic Breazeale would actually be my last choice. And I'd certainly have picked non-American opponents like Johan de Par and those sort of guys well ahead of Breazeale. Because to me, and it's not all about the eye test, but to me, Dominic Breazeale does not pass the eye test. He's slow, unathletic, ponderous. Whilst he has a high KO ratio, I think that tells us more about the level of opposition he's been in with, as opposed to the fact that he actually, carries a substantial amount of power. And he's just unconvincing in the ring, Breazeale. I'll give a few examples. I guess let's put it this way. Dominic Breazeale went to 15-0 without really facing a solid test in the pros. He did outpoint Nagy Aguilera. Nagy Aguilera isn't terrible, but I guess you could say he's a well-known journeyman. Then he moved up to face Fred Cassie. Now, he got a points win over Fred Cassie, but that was a fight where many people thought Fred Cassie deserved to get the nod. A lot of people say Fred Cassie was robbed in that fight, or very, very unlucky. Now, Fred Cassie is a tough guy to look good against. He's tricky, admittedly, but he's no world beater. And, if Hughie Fury goes out and beats Fred Cassie like I expect him to this weekend, that will give you a bit more insight as to what an elite boxer can do against an opponent like Fred Cassie. It's pretty fair to say that Dominic Breazeale laboured to victory over Cassie. I then picked Amir Mansour in his most recent fight to knock him out. I didn't think he'd be able to live with Mansour. And, Mansour is 6 foot. I think he was in his early to mid 40s when he took the fight. And I thought he absolutely destroyed Breazeale for the early rounds. We saw Breazeale on the floor. We saw him hurt. We saw him utterly unable to keep Mansour off him, to keep him on the outside. We saw him having no idea what to do against Mansour when Mansour did get on the inside. And we saw Mansour really just sort of bullying him around the ring and hurting him. Breazeale admittedly did so hard in that fight and won in slightly bizarre circumstances, with Mansour retiring, having pretty much won every round of the fight up to that point. I believe he'd bitten through his tongue or something pretty horrific like that, so he had to retire. Breazeale showed heart, he showed determination to stay in a fight he was getting battered in. But for me, we're building a consistent picture here. Breazeale stepped up to top 50 level in Fred Cassie, and he laboured to an unconvincing win. He then stepped up to top 40 level when he faced Amir Mansour, and he looked horrible. He looked horrible. He looked slow. He didn't have the power or the jab required to keep a guy like Mansour off him. And again, I think Breazeale's found his level. So he's now stepping up from Fred Cassie and Amir Mansour straight in to top 10 level in Anthony Joshua. And I think as unathletic and as ponderous as Breazeale is, Anthony Joshua is not going to find too much trouble landing on him, and not going to find too much trouble landing on him quite quickly. And given the way that Mansour was able to hurt him, given the fact that his punch resistance was brought into severe questions at times during that fight, I'm going to be honest and say it wouldn't surprise me if this is a one-round knockout for Anthony Joshua. I just don't think Dominic Breazeale is going to have the skill, the speed, the jab to keep Anthony Joshua off him. And I think when Anthony Joshua lands, it could be good night. You know, we know Joshua's got big power. And I'm pretty convinced, having seen the Mansour fight, Dominic Breazeale's not going to be able to live with it. So, for me, I see the business reasons to make the fight. He's a big guy, he's unbeaten, he's got a high KO ratio, he's an American, he's an Olympian. That's all sound. But this isn't a good fight from my eyes. And I did say, when I did my video on it a week ago, this would be my least preferred opponent. Now look, people say I'm critical on Anthony Joshua. I'm not being critical on Anthony Joshua here. I'm just being critical on the fight. And to be fair to myself, I actually was very... I actually said that the Dillian Whyte and the Charles Martin fights were actually very ambitious fights for Anthony Joshua at this stage of his career. So, you know, I haven't always been critical of his level of opponent, you know. But what I would say is Dominic Breazeale, for me, is actually a worse opponent than Charles Martin. And Dominic Breazeale, for me, is actually a worse opponent than Dillian Whyte. Funnily enough, at one point, Breazeale and Martin were scheduled to fight each other. And you can look back at the history. I picked Martin to beat Breazeale in that fight. I'd certainly pick Dillian Whyte to beat Breazeale. I don't see Breazeale really as a relevant force in the heavyweight division. And I think he's really going to come unstuck against someone who's a bit more athletic than him, who puts it on him and can whack a bit. And I think Anthony Joshua certainly ticks all of those boxes. So for me, don't be surprised if this is a one-round fight. I'd be very surprised to see this go beyond 3 or 4. And I think that is slightly disappointing. I think Joshua still needs learning experiences. Most importantly, he needs to go rounds. You know, he's gone a very small amount of rounds in his pro career. And that is a major concern before he steps up to fight the elite of the sport. And my major concern is that a fight against Taverne, a fight against Depar, a fight against even Molina would have probably provided some much needed rounds. Whereas this could be over in, you know, the first time Joshua lands. So that's my disappointment with that fight. The co-main event is actually a much better fight. George Groves versus Martin Murray. This fight was rumoured to be being made for some time now, so it's of no surprise, and I've said before and I'll say again that I'm going to pick George Groves to win this fight. Martin Murray's a likeable fighter, but fundamentally comes up short at the top level. And I'm not necessarily saying George Groves is top level, but what I am saying is George Groves certainly has some very elite attributes. His movement is good. His jab is one of the best in Britain, as we know, and under Shane McGuigan has looked particularly on point of late. And I just think offensively, Groves is going to have too much for Martin Murray. Martin Murray's tough, he's strong, he's defensively aware, he's okay technically, he's good technically in fact. But does he carry the offensive threat of George Groves? Does he have power like George Groves? Does he put punches together like George Groves? Does he have a jab like George Groves? You know, I just don't see Martin Murray as having the power to knock George Groves out. I don't see him having the eye-catching work or the snap to his punches to outpoint George Groves. He's tricky, he's experienced, he's got a bit of class, he can make Groves look poor at areas and in areas of the fight. I don't disagree with that. But for me, it's very hard to pick Martin Murray to beat George Groves because I just think George Groves is the much more eye-catching fighter, the much more skilled and well-rounded offensive fighter, and I don't see Murray being able to stop Groves. You know, Groves may not have the best chin, but Martin Murray is not a big hitter, I must say. So that's my thoughts, really. It's a good fight. It's a better fight than the main event, and we'll probably get some rounds from that fight. But yeah, I think Joshua and Groves would be very comfortable predictions at this point. Probably Joshua by very early KO, Groves by points. If you're interested, guys, I'm going to do a live phone-in show tonight. From now on, the phone-in show is going to be every Monday night at 9 o'clock. The podcast, which we're launching this week, is going to be every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock on YouTube. But if you want to take part in the live show, if you want to watch it when it broadcasts, make sure you subscribe to the channel. That means it will come up on your YouTube. My social media is in the description box. You can follow me on Twitter or add me on Facebook, and I'll make sure a link is available to the live stream before it goes out, so you can check those. But we'll be going live at 9 o'clock. The initial plan was to take callers and discuss the weekend's action, Golovkin, Chocolatito. We'll still do that, but I'm also keen to hear people's thoughts and get a bit of discussion as to these two fights as well. So yeah, get involved in the live show at 9 o'clock tonight. Watch it live, maybe call in, and go from there. Thanks for watching, guys. If you've enjoyed this video, do give me the thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on my future stuff. Many thanks for watching.